This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today is our September edition of Incentives and Instincts, a recurring series in which I speak with economist and friend Bryce Ward about some of the broader challenges facing our society. Bryce, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I've heard mention of an election. We have one of those coming up, right?
Apparently.
Yeah. So in that spirit, today we're going to talk about what is versus what ought to be with our elections. And we'll ground our conversation in one of my favorite H.L. Mencken quotes. Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and they deserve to get it good and hard. It kind of sums up the state we're in these days, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting it good and hard. I guess we'll have to dig into people know what they want, and are we getting what they want?
And the thinking behind this is it seems like we're in this, what is being labeled vibes election. We'll talk about the merits of that, but it seems like we've landed here, and the purpose of an election, I think, is to select our leaders. Are our elections doing that work?
The election works, right? We fill in ballots and people get selected. The question is are they doing the work? Is the process leading up to the election successfully identifying and selecting the people who best represent the will of the people?
Yeah, I think that's right. So elections are a measure, and are they measuring people's preferences?
Is the process leading us to even understand our own preferences?
I think that's right.
I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
right?
is the measure picking up on our actual preferences?
In a fully rational sense, it's work to figure out what my preferences are and then how to amalgamate that into a single person or set of people. And it's hard. And so the question is this the process that we currently marinate in, does it help me understand what the issues are and where people stand on those issues and what I actually think about those issues? And am I actually reasonably informed about what I think and what the right answers are?
Yeah. So let's start by defining, this concept of a vibes election. When people say, when we hear in the media, like, hey, this is the vibes election, what are they actually saying?
I think what people are saying is that it's all just kind of gut. This election has been very thin on concrete discussion of actual policy or even stakes, right? What are the problems?
Mm-hmm.
What are the policies? It's kind of like teams and how much enthusiasm can you generate in your team? And therefore, it's more vibesy. I can remember past elections where there were lots of detailed policy discussions and we were getting into the weeds of those policy discussions and the trade-offs implied in them. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like I've seen much of that.
The overwhelming sentiment out of the Republican convention was we're winning and it feels good to win and be with us because we're winners. And on the Democratic side, it was like we're patriotic and be with us because we're patriotic. We're Americans. That was sort of the brand vibe that came out of those two conventions. Candidates are positioning themselves based on vibes and identity, feel. And, and that's a strategy that appeals to us. Like we say, like, hey, do we want to be a member of that team? Is that my sort of people? And, that could have some utility in helping me understand my preferences. That could drive my preferences as a voter, potentially. It seems to drive preferences of a lot of voters. I guess the question we're sort of getting to here is, does that produce the best outcome?
From a more rational standpoint, I have some concerns.
Yeah.
Right? In that the vibes can feel good and I can end up empowering somebody who is going to absolutely make my life, well, not a total disaster, but, at the margin will make my life worse. Mm-hmm. Right? And to the extent that happens, to the extent that I've empowered people who don't understand my problems, who don't share my priorities, who make trade-offs when it comes to making decisions that are not the ones that I favor, then I think that's a mistake. And so the question is yeah, it's really a question of, can vibes sufficiently proxy for what I call the 3 Ps, right? Problems, priorities, and policies. And, because that's ultimately what politicians do.
That's supposed to be their job.
In theory, that is what we the system is supposed to allow for these people to aggregate up a bunch of preferences. There's always trade-offs within that. It's very rare that you're going to find somebody who's going to have a complete alignment with me. But, what you're hoping for is, amongst the various options, who comes the closest?
Is it possible we've landed here as a reflection of our cynicism? That there is gridlock and lack of productivity in our governance. The system's not working for anybody in the way it should as far as making decisions about problems, priorities, and policy, that it just boils down to go with the person I think I like the most. I'd like to have a beer with that guy. Remember the George W. Bush sentiment?
And I think there's a lot to that. The way that I feel like it kind of works is, certainly at the presidential level, Americans want a celebrity.
Well,
right? They want somebody who, they don't have to be an actual celebrity.
Yeah.
But I call it the late night talk show test. It seems that the candidates who are more successful in presidential elections are people who can succeed on a late night talk show.
So I agree with you about the premise of the late night talk show, that having people being able to sort of be likable, but also just the familiarity effect. The more exposure you have in the marketplace, the more people are like, oh yeah, I recognize that name. I saw a yard sign. It just has some familiarity, so you'll check that box.
Yeah, and part of what the late night talk show test is about is succeeding on a late night talk show breeds that familiarity.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody tanks on a talk show, like you're like, I don't really like them. They don't get asked back. Being able to kind of show up and crack jokes with the host and do all that kind of stuff it seems to be part of the presidential test.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that feeds into vibes, right? It's very much like, I just kind of trust, this likability thing or whatever it is. Maybe that's the right way to do this.
Yeah. Is that predictive of success in the job or efficacy in the job?
It's predictive of success in the election.
Right.
Right? So therefore, it's effective in winning an election.
Yeah.
Is it effective at actually doing the job? There's some correlation, right? There are some of the campaigning skills in terms of building relationships and, being good with people and all that stuff that are absolutely an essential part of being the job of a politician.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a bunch of other things that are probably not at all correlated with that. They're just orthogonal, right? They're just unrelated, right? In terms of decision making and, having hard conversations and
coalition building.
An election is an exercise in coalition building, and there's some trade-offs that you make in terms of your messaging, right? But there's no, and there's trade-offs in terms of your strategy you're executing. So I won't say that there's no overlap. But it's very different when you're talking about, we're going to make a decision about who pays how much in taxes or how much gets spent or, what kind of regulations we put in. And the trade-offs that go into that have economy-wide implications, right? Or have real trade-offs for actual human beings.
We have this selection device that is an election. We're not sure if it's selecting in the right way, and we're not sure that it's selecting on the right variables for the job. I mean, there was an interesting postmortem in 2016 by Ezra Klein where he basically asked the question, why is it that Hillary Clinton is really liked when she's in a political job, but she's intensely disliked when she is running for a political post? And the conclusion in that piece, I'm not necessarily endorsing it, I thought it was interesting. His conclusion was that elections are designed to celebrate and reward a lot of male traits, whereas leadership roles, often a lot of traditionally female attributes are predictive of success in those jobs. So she was an effective leader when in office, however, an unliked candidate when campaigning, because the campaigning process is the process to win an election. Being an effective candidate is different than being an effective leader.
It's like any job selection process, right? Job selection processes are very much imperfect.
Yeah.
Can we create enough of an obstacle course, so to speak, right, or a draft combine, if you like sports, that allows you to kind of say, okay, well, at least we're picking up on the full range of domains that I need to care about versus what I feel like our political campaigns are built around, which is, are you a big charismatic public speaker? Are you good at like making chit chat as you work a rope line? Are you good at fundraising?
Yeah, that's a big piece of it.
Do I have a good biography? I'm not sure that managing the campaign or running a campaign or, it doesn't reveal to us like, oh, okay, well, this is what this, the decision-making piece of the job.
Yeah.
Like, what decisions will you make when confronted with these particular situations, trade-offs? And that's what representation means, right? And politicians have gotten very good at not telling me what they think about things.
Well, yeah.
Right? Telling me the vibes-based version of generic speak, right? And never putting themselves in a situation where they get pinned down. If you just say, well, what do we disagree at the fundamental level in politics, right? The fundamental disagreements are, is that a problem?
Yep.
Right? Sometimes you think that's a big problem and I don't. The next thing is, even if we agree that X is a problem, is this a big problem, an important problem? Or is this something, we should get to, and if we have an opportunity, but it's down the priority list, right? So that's the priorities piece.
And wrapped up in the priorities piece, is there the agreement as to whether or not government is the right tool to solve the problem?
Yeah, that could be there, could be policy, either one. We agree it's a priority, but I want to do this and you want to do that. And there's actual big differences in what those look like. And that's policy. Those are the policy trade-offs. And so, from a ideal representation perspective, what I want is to say, well, I've got to figure out what I think the problems are. I'm not sure our current process does a good job of doing that, because if you had said, hey, Bryce, tell me what you think the biggest problems are, I would have to think about it. If you want to understand problems, you have to ask it at least 3 different levels, right? Which is, what are your problems, right? Things that I absolutely should be able to tell you, like upon reflection, these are the things that are problems for me or things I worry about. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, you make one, move out the social network. Okay, well, what are the problems about people that you know? One of the problems with that step in our current world is that I don't know a wide, diverse group of people. So if you said, well, who are the problems that I would talk about? People that look like me, because those are the people that I see.
Right.
And then the third thing is, okay, well, what are the general problems or your perceptions of the general problems in your community? And that's where, okay, I read the newspaper and they told me about this problem, or, I had this feeling based on the vibes that these are the other problems, but I don't have like necessarily firsthand experience with them. But then, so we go through that exercise of these are my specific problems, these are my social networks problems, and these are what I think the larger set of problems are. I don't feel like, in some ideal sense, this would be the front page of the newspaper every week, right? Kind of like the top 10 in the college football poll, right?
Here are the problems.
Here are the problems, right? And they would move up and down, right? Oh, inflation's spiking up. Yep. Oh, inflation's moving up the rankings. Oh, it's kind of taming. It's falling back down, right? Crime spiked up. Oh, it's falling, and we would have some sense, okay, well, this is what the rankings are right now.
And there is some sort of evidence that the economy is always the top problem on that list, that people vote their pocketbook. I mean, it often comes down to that for many.
To some degree, although the problem with the economy.
Yeah. What does that even mean?
It's like polls ask this.
Yeah.
Tell me what your biggest issue is, all right? And then they give you a list. Healthcare, the economy, right? The environment.
We'll be back to my conversation with Bryce Ward after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com.
This is Jeff Meese, media technician at the College of Business, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm here with Bryce Ward, talking about vibes and their role in this election. But if we're waving this magic wand, I mean, you've talked about the efficacy of deliberative polling, putting people in a room to discuss an issue is an effective way at reaching decisions that are productive. Like, describe that system and how it might map onto something like this.
Yeah. So, in one world, one way of trying to do this in a way that can scale, right? Because it's one of the problems, right?
You have to scale it.
It has to be scalable, right? So the problem with just straight telephone polling is the questions, they can't ask too many, right? It's got to be over in like 10 minutes. You've got a shortcut, like again, with problems, healthcare, the economy, give me this list of 10 and tell me where they rank, right? And, they're not made up. There are some problems within each of those buckets and, how you deal with them. But so getting more specific requires effort. And so the idea behind deliberative polling is that you take the time to put a random group of people together and walk them through conversations and lectures where they have to learn about some things, but then they're also then telling you, okay, I've thought about this and I think these are the problems, right? So deliberative polling would be a great way to come up with what a random group of Montanans or Americans rank as, these are the problems and this is the priority they put them on, right? And then, from an actual campaign perspective, I would also love to just put the candidates in there and see how the random group of Americans
in the room with the folks.
In the room with the
Love it.
folks. Let's see how they respond to you, right?
Yeah.
And let me know that, 10% of voters for candidate X change their mind to the other guy after spending a weekend with them.
So take 100 randomly sampled Montanans, put them in a room with John Tester and Tim Sheehy, and then take the results of that
and not just
have those 100 people vote,
and not just like a town hall kind of thing, right?
A structured conversation.
No, we're here for 2 days.
Okay.
And you're going to be in small groups where you're going to be able to really kind of try and measure these people.
Say we do this, put these 100 people plus the 2 senatorial candidates in a room doing a bunch of stuff for a weekend. Would you trust the vote of those 100 people after that weekend more than you would trust the vote that we currently have?
I mean, I'd like it to be 500 people, but yeah.
Okay.
Because again, in Montana, you might have actually bumped into candidates at least at some level. So you have some, greater, some familiarity that's not just based
the
on
big
ads.
small town effect.
But for the most part, I don't know these people.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had to sit there and watch them answer somebody's question, watch them think through a difficult question.
Yeah.
Not be able to run away from a follow-up question. The Montana Free Press has an outstanding election guide.
It does.
Right? But it's we got to ask you these questions. They ask the same questions to everybody, and you get very clearly edited responses back.
Yeah, they're tested and edited and all that sort of stuff.
And most of the time when I read them, I'm like, I would really like this follow-up question to be asked.
Yeah.
Right? Basically, you didn't really answer that question, right? Those are all nice sounding words, but what does this mean, right? And what I think if you force people into a room with people for some time, you actually have to get through that process, right? You don't get to do you got to ask your question at the town hall, and now you didn't like the answer, too bad.
Yeah.
We're on to the next one, right?
So the scale problem is really difficult to deal with, and the representation problem. How do you say it's 500 people? You got to have some method for designing the appropriate sample size here. But how do you then select those people?
Because this is a heavy lift.
It is a heavy
lift. Right? This isn't hey, do you have 5 minutes to answer this question on your cell phone, right? It's no, we're going to pay. Obviously, we're not going to make you pay, but we're going to take up several days of your time and give you this cool experience.
Yeah.
right? Because I think I would happily sign up for something like this.
Yes.
But like, yeah, we're basically saying give up some of your free time.
And then how do you protect those people too? Right? Protect them from the outcome of their decision and the fact that people might not like it and all those sorts of things.
There would be growing pains to start.
Yeah.
My guess is that people would either it works or it doesn't, right? And if it works, it will work well, right? And people will be like, "Oh, what did the group think?" Right? And if it's split, right? But if you basically see a lot of movement towards one candidate, depending on how you break it out or how it's reported out or, how the campaign ads get filmed out of it, like I went into the meeting and I was skeptical, but then he said these things and, whatever it is, right? But the point is that the only way to get to the 3 Ps means that we have to create opportunities for more work, more information to be exposed, right? Because right now it's really easy I'm going to dance. I'm going to bob and weave as a candidate, right?
Okay. I'm
going to avoid pinning you. You're not going to pin me down. You might be able to I'm going to tell you that healthcare is my issue or that Social Security is my issue or whatever it is. You'll get some broad sense of like, this is the big issue and I'm going to say the right thing about it. But even then, when you're not going to get at like, okay, well, what are we really going to decide when, push comes to shove on this trade-off, right? That only comes from in-depth conversations. The soundbite approach, right, is what we've been living in for a very long time. And the soundbite approach rewards people who are good at soundbites.
Sure.
Right?
Canned lines going into the debate.
Canned lines, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't help me. Well, I can only get an imperfect sense of what do you think the problems are? What do you think the priorities are? What do you think the policies that you should address them are? What would you be willing to trade off in the policies? Because ultimately, like, it's probably not smart to make a bunch of people write a bunch of healthcare plans.
No.
It's probably pretty wasteful. Maybe there's enough value in coming up with ideas through that process that it pays off in the end. But maybe it's probably better just to have think tanks do that on their own and not try and do it as part of political candidate campaigns. But what is useful is, okay, here's some trade-offs that exist in the legislative process, right? Let's pick some. How would you resolve this trade-off between raising taxes and cutting spending in whatever program, right? Oh, gosh, that program is really important to me. I would rather raise taxes. Nope. I'd rather cut the program, right? We almost never see that. We almost never get to like, oh, I understand your trade-off making process, right? And in part, it maybe doesn't even matter because it's the Senate leadership who makes all the trade-offs anyway, and you're just there to empower them. But like in an ideal world, I would like my representatives to be sitting there trading off things in the way that we in Montana want them to trade them off.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's been made by many, but David French raised it recently about elections for the president people should pay more attention to foreign policy because all the domestic stuff never goes down the way the presidential candidates say it will, but foreign policy is an actual area where the president has a lot of power. So we should listen carefully to what they say in that domain, yet it's certainly not playing a huge role in this election. And in the preceding years, it hasn't played as large a role as I think the power of the president to affect change in that domain would indicate.
This applies beyond just the president, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a question of, okay, you're running around talking about this all the time. Is this something you can actually do something about?
Right.
And again, to the Montana Free Press's credit, that's one of the questions that's in the election guide is what can you do from Washington on this thing, right? And, that's where you go like, these answers maybe aren't the best because they're not acknowledging the fundamental problem, which is maybe that's not something that you can do a ton about in Washington. Although some of them have some things where there's very specific things that the federal government can do to address, say, housing affordability in Montana. But, there are limits, right? There's a lot of our campaigns are straight up misdirection, right?
Yeah.
They're running around because that's the thing has the vibes. So I'm going to basically try and make sure that you agree with me on those vibes.
Yeah.
Even though at the office that I'm going to hold, I have absolutely nothing to do with that. Or to the extent that I have anything to do with it, it's trivial, right? But I have this enormous power to do all this other stuff. And you have, you're basically just trusting that because I agree with you on the vibes on that issue, that I'm also going to make the same trade-offs with respect to what my priorities are, what policies I'll support, what trade-offs I'll deal with. And maybe I'm wrong, but I would love to see some more attempts to try and test this in a way that helps me understand that, no, vibe away, right? Go with the vibes. Although if we can go with the vibes, can we also do it without the campaign ads? Because I'm like, I think every Montanan at this point, deeply over them.
Yeah, I don't know what is a harder problem to solve. The structure of our elections or the sort of presence of campaign ads within
the financing of them and the way they play out. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Montana tried to come up with his own campaign finance solution that was not allowed, apparently.
Well, Bryce, that seems like a good place to end it. We've identified a problem. We've agreed that it's a high priority. I don't think we came up with a viable policy to solve it. I mean, I think the policy that we proposed here, the deliberative polling, could work. It's just a question of could it actually ever come to pass? I'm less.
Look, at a bare minimum, I would strongly encourage a campaign to try it. You don't have to have, in an ideal world, it would be big and public and it would be both candidates and all that because you would get the true kind of comparison. But I would just love to see what would happen if you made a concerted effort to give a random group of people extended access to a candidate to discuss problems, priorities, and policies, and see how many of them move toward or away from your candidate, right? And then tell me about it.
That's a great measure. Yeah. So if we could replicate that or execute and replicate that in a variety of contexts, I think we'd be making some progress.
We would certainly be learning about, again, maybe it's just that people are gullible to charismatic candidates.
Could be.
But I would love to hear how people process those interactions when you got to do more than just smile and shake the hand with a politician, right? We actually got to sit down and be like, well, tell me about your problems. And I'm like, well, this is my problem. And they do their relate thing. And then you talk about, if the group agrees that this is a big problem, then you say, okay, well, talk to me about what policies you've seen that might address it. Be honest with me about what problems, why some of these, why these policies aren't the best. And we need to keep thinking harder about more. But show me how you think. Show me that you understand the issues, can think on your feet, are willing to say, I don't know, right? All of those things build trust that I can trust that you will represent me.
Well, I hope we can get there. Okay, so we have an appropriate listener question this month. Let's hear from Peter.
Hi, this is Peter from Missoula, a longtime listener, first-time caller. And my question is there anything now that the presidential race is kind of solidified in either candidate's policy proposals that might be particularly relevant to Montanans? Thanks.
Well, that is right on the nose, is it not? I mean, do we even know if there are policy proposals from either candidate that are relevant to Montanans? Because he referenced the presidential race. So from either presidential candidate, do we have any policies? Well, tariffs, right? If we have, Trump has recently said he wants to increase tariffs, and we have a lot of import-export here in Montana.
So tariffs absolutely will have an effect everywhere, but on Montana as well, right? Mm-hmm. A tariff is just a tax. It's a regressive tax. It's a tax on the price that you pay.
Define regressive tax.
Poor pay more as a share of their income.
Sure. It's uniform across the income distribution.
Everybody, a sales tax. It's a sales tax. So it's a sales tax on every import.
But make the best case for a tariff.
You're asking an economist to make a case for the tariff?
Okay, strike that from the record.
No.
That's all the time we have for this episode. If you'd like to hear more of this conversation and receive other exclusive content, please consider a paid subscription. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Killy Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. And Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.